The city was alive with noise, a mix of footsteps, honking cars, and the hum of people rushing to work or shopping in busy stores. Crowds moved quickly, heads down, lost in their own world. Among them, on an old bench near the corner of a busy street, sat Marcus. His coat was torn, his shoes worn thin. And beside him rested a faded backpack that carried the few things he still owned, to most people passing by. Marcus was invisible. Some glanced at him quickly, then turned away as if embarrassed to have looked too long. Others frowned, whispering to each other, assuming the worst about him because of his ragged clothes and tired face. Children tugged at their parents' hands, asking innocent questions, only to be hushed and pulled along. Marcus had grown used to it. He had lived this life long enough to know how people saw him not as a man, but as a problem. Yet, inside Marcus's heart, he carried memories far heavier than the backpack by his side. He was not always like this. Years ago, he wore a uniform, stood tall, and was called Sergeant. He had once marched with brothers who trusted him with their lives. Men who had fought alongside him in deserts and jungles, facing danger every day. Back then, he had purpose. Back then, people respected him. But when the war ended and he returned home, life did not welcome him with open arms. Finding work had been hard. Bills piled up. Friends drifted away. The scars of war, both seen and unseen, followed him everywhere. Slowly, his life unraveled until one day he realized he had no home to return to. The streets became his shelter, benches his bed, and strangers his silent company. That afternoon, Marcus sat quietly, watching people pass. His eyes were tired but observant, noticing details others missed. He saw the nervous woman juggling her shopping bags, the teenager running late, the businessman barking orders into his phone. He wondered how many of them would ever guess that the homeless man on the bench had once saved lives, had once stood where bullets flew and fear was constant. None of them would imagine that he still dreamed of those nights under foreign skies. Sitting with his brothers in arms, sharing stories and promises to always have each other's backs, Marcus wasn't bitter. He had stopped expecting kindness long ago. Instead, he found small comfort in routine. Every day he sat in the same place, keeping to himself, never asking for much. Sometimes a stranger would hand him a sandwich or a cup of coffee, and he would thank them softly. Most days, though, he simply endured. The air was cold that day, the kind of cold that bit through his thin coat. He pulled it tighter around him and rubbed his hands together. His stomach growled, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the rhythm of the street. To Marcus, the city had a language rush of cars, the chatter of footsteps, the rise and fall of voices. It reminded him of marching boots, of orders shouted in the distance. Different sounds, but the same feeling of movement and urgency as he sat. A small boy broke free from his mother's grip and ran past Marcus. The boy tripped, dropping a toy soldier onto the ground. Marcus bent down slowly, picked it up, and handed it back with a gentle smile. "Don't lose your little warrior," he said softly. The boy grinned, and for a moment, Marcus felt human again. But then the mother pulled her child away quickly, muttering something under her breath. The warmth faded, replaced by the familiar sting of being unwanted. Still, Marcus held on to that brief smile. It reminded him that beneath the layers of dirt and torn clothes, he was still himself. He was still Marcus, the man who once had courage, the man who once had brothers who never left him behind. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows stretched across the street. People continued to pass, hardly noticing the quiet man on the bench. To them, he was just another homeless figure, a part of the city background. But fate had already started moving. Something was about to happen that would remind everyone, including Marcus himself, that he was far more than what they saw. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, The very streets that ignored him would soon become the stage for a moment that would change his life forever. Asterisk, the evening air was sharp, and the street buzzed with its usual chaos, cars rushing by, people hurrying home, neon lights flickering to life as the city prepared for another night. Marcus sat quietly on his bench, his back slightly hunched, his hands tucked inside his coat for warmth. He wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't begging. He was just there, watching, existing, but in a city that moved too fast. Being invisible sometimes drew the wrong kind of attention. Two police officers walked down the sidewalk, their boots striking the pavement in steady rhythm. They were young, restless, and carried the heavy air of authority. Their eyes swept the street, scanning for trouble, at least what they considered trouble. And then their gaze landed on Marcus. There he is again, one muttered under his breath. Same guy, same spot. Doesn't move. The other officer smirked. Homeless. Probably drunk or causing trouble. Let's clear him out. Coos didn't notice them at first. He was staring at the traffic light, lost in thought. But he felt their presence before he saw them, the sudden shift in the air, the shadow falling across his bench. When he looked up, two stern faces stared back at him. All right, old man, the taller officer said, his voice sharp. What are you doing here? Marcus blinked, confused by the question. Just sitting, he replied quietly. His voice was calm, respectful, but weary. Just sitting. The other officer scoffed. You can't loiter around here. People don't want you hanging around their shops. Marcus's shoulders tensed. He wasn't in front of a store. He wasn't blocking anyone. But he had learned long ago that arguing rarely helped. He nodded slightly. I'm not causing trouble. Just resting my legs. The officers exchanged looks, their smirks growing. To them, his calmness wasn't dignity, was weakness. They stepped closer, their presence looming over him. Stand up, the taller one barked. Marcus hesitated. His body was tired, his knees sore. Why? He asked softly. Because we said so, the officer snapped. Unless you'd prefer we drag you to the station. You got ID on you. Marcus's heart sank. He had no ID. His wallet had been lost long ago, and with no address, no job, and no steady life, there wasn't much point in trying to replace it. He looked down at his worn shoes, the silence heavy between them. The second officer smirked. What's the matter? Can't answer. You hiding something? Marcus felt the eyes of strangers on him now. A small crowd had begun to notice the scene. Some people slowed down, phones in their hands, recording. Others shook their heads and walked faster, not wanting to get involved. Marcus drew a long breath, steadying himself. I'm not hiding anything, he said quietly. I served this country. I just fell on hard times. The officers laughed, sharp and cruel. Served this country. Sure you did. And now you're serving the sidewalk, huh? The words stung more than he wanted to admit. They didn't know him. They didn't know the weight of the years he carried, the long nights in the desert, the brothers he had lost, the battles he had survived. To them, he was just another homeless man, another shadow to push aside. Listen, Marcus said carefully, his voice low but steady. I don't want trouble. Just let me be. But his plea only fueled their arrogance. One officer nudged his backpack with his boot. What's in here? Stolen goods. Drugs. Marcus's jaw tightened. His backpack was all he had left. Some clothes, a worn blanket, a picture of his old squad. Watching them kick it around felt like watching someone trample on his last shred of dignity. The crowd grew thicker. Whispers floated through the air. Some people muttered that the cops were going too far. Others just watched with curiosity, waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus sat very still, but inside his chest, his heart was pounding. He had spent years learning how to keep calm under pressure, how to survive in situations far worse than this. But he also knew one thing: he didn't have to be alone in this moment. He still had someone powerful. Someone who would not let him be treated this way. The officers didn't know it yet. But they were minutes away from facing a truth they would never forget. Marcus slowly reached into his coat pocket, pulling out an old phone, scratched and barely working. The officers exchanged mocking looks. "What's this?" Calling for backup. "Who's gonna save you, huh?" Marcus's eyes lifted to meet theirs, calm but steady. "My old war buddy," he said simply. They laughed out loud, shaking their heads. "Oh yeah, and what's he? The mayor?" Marcus looked down at the phone, scrolling to the name he hadn't dialed in years. He whispered it softly under his breath: James Carter. To the officers, it meant nothing. But to Marcus, it meant everything, because James Carter was not just a friend. He was not just a soldier. He was now a 4-star general, and Marcus was about to remind them that every man they judged as nothing might have a history far greater than they could imagine. The street had grown louder. By now, several people had stopped to watch, drawn in by the raised voices of the officers and the calm but steady replies of Marcus. Phones were lifted high, recording every second. To most onlookers, it looked like another clash between authority and the forgotten man of the streets. But to Marcus, it was something far more personal. It was a test of dignity. The taller officer crossed his arms, smirking down at him. "You really think sitting here all day makes you special? You said you served, huh? Where's your proof? You don't even have ID. For all we know, you're lying." Marcus's hands tightened around his old phone, the one lifeline he still had. He wanted to shout, to tell them about the medals he once earned, about the nights when he had carried wounded brothers across battlefields while bullets tore through the air. He wanted to remind them that he had once worn the same flag on his shoulder that they now carried on their uniforms. But he didn't. He had learned long ago that shouting back never worked. His silence, though, made them bolder. "Answer us." The second officer snapped, stepping closer, his hand brushing against his belt as if to remind Marcus of the authority he held. "What are you hiding?" "Drugs, stolen cash. Or maybe you just like scaring people sitting here, looking all dirty and dangerous." The words sank into Marcus like stones. Dirty, dangerous, criminal. They didn't see the soldier who once stood for something greater. They only saw the man the world had left behind. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people whispered that the cops were going too far. A few shook their heads, uneasy with the scene unfolding before them. But most just watched, their faces blank, content to let the show play out. Marcus slowly stood up, his knees aching, but his back straight. For the first time, his voice carried not just calmness, but weight. "I told you," he said, looking each officer in the eye, "I served this country. I'm not a criminal, and I don't deserve to be treated like one." The taller officer laughed, his tone dripping with mockery. "Oh, listen to him. Big talk for a man who sleeps on benches." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A young woman with a phone muttered, "This doesn't feel right." But still, no one stepped forward. Marcus's heart was pounding now, not from fear, but from the sharp memory of battlefields. He remembered nights when men far younger than these officers had stood shoulder to shoulder with him, never once questioning his worth. He remembered James Carter, his brother in arms, pulling him up when he had fallen, swearing that they would never leave each other behind. That promise echoed in his mind. Now, the officer nudged his backpack again with his boot, harder this time. "What's in there, old man? You want us to open it in front of everyone? Let them see what you're really carrying." Marcus stepped forward, placing his hand firmly on the strap of his bag. His voice was low, but steady. Don't touch it." The sudden firmness in his tone made the officers pause for just a second. The crowd leaned in closer, sensing that the quiet man on the bench was no ordinary figure. Marcus unlocked his phone, his fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. The officers exchanged amused looks. "Oh, here we go," one said loudly. "He's calling the president." A few people in the crowd chuckled nervously. But Marcus didn't answer. He scrolled down, past names he hadn't touched in years, until he reached one, James Carter. His thumb hovered over the name. Memories flashed in his mind, the dust of the battlefield, the roar of gunfire. The sight of Carter reaching down to pull him up after an explosion had knocked him off his feet. "Stay with me, Marcus," Carter had shouted that day. "We get out of this together." And now, years later, Marcus whispered those words to himself. He pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Twice, the officers folded their arms, still smirking. Sure, one said loudly. "Your big shot buddy's gonna swoop in and rescue you? What is he now, a senator? Maybe Batman?" Marcus raised his eyes, locking onto them. His face was calm, but his words were steady and sharp. "He's not a senator. He's not Batman." The line clicked. A strong, commanding voice echoed through the small speaker. "Marcus, is that you?" Marcus exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest releasing at the sound of the voice. "Yeah, it's me," he replied. I need you." The crowd hushed. The mocking laughter of the officers faltered, replaced by curiosity. The name on Marcus's lips meant nothing to them yet. But they were about to learn who James Carter truly was, and when they did, the entire street would never forget the man they had once mocked as nothing. Asterisk. The air felt heavy as Marcus lifted the phone to his ear. The line buzzed once, then twice. The police officers hovered close, their arms crossed, their mouths curled in mocking smiles. To them, this was entertainment. To the crowd, it was curiosity. What could a homeless man possibly be calling about? Marcus's hand trembled slightly, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "James." On the other end came a pause, then a deep, commanding voice, one Marcus knew instantly. "Marcus's brother, is that you?" It had been years since he had heard that voice. Yet in an instant, the memories returned. Dusty battlefields, nights huddled in trenches, the sound of Carter's voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, as if drawing strength from that memory. "Yes, it's me," Marcus said softly. His words were calm, but everyone nearby leaned in, sensing the shift in tone. "I'm in trouble." The police officers exchanged smirks. One leaned closer, speaking loud enough for the crowd to hear. "So, who is this?" "Your lawyer." "Your parole officer." Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he held the phone steady and continued. "I'm being harassed. Right here on the street. They don't believe me when I tell them who I am." On the other end, the silence broke with sharp precision. "Where are you right now?" Marcus gave the address. He could almost picture Carter, no, not Carter. General Carter scribbling it down, his jaw tightening with each word. The officers rolled their eyes. "Oh, please. Who's gonna come running for you, huh? Some old drinking buddy." Marcus opened his eyes, his gaze sharp now, no longer weary but filled with quiet power. He looked directly at them and said, "Not a drinking buddy. My war buddy." The crowd stirred. Phones were raised higher, whispers spread like fire. People could feel something big was about to unfold. On the phone, Carter's voice grew sharper. "Stay where you are. Don't move. I'll handle it." Marcus's lips curved into the faintest smile, the kind that carried both relief and certainty. "I knew I could count on you," he said softly. The taller officer scoffed loudly. "This is ridiculous." You expect us to believe your so-called war buddy is going to show up here like some hero. Who is he supposed to be? Captain America? The crowd laughed nervously, but Marcus remained silent. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to convince them. Because soon they would see for themselves. The second officer shook his head. Man, you're wasting our time. We should haul you in right now just for making a scene. But Marcus stayed still, phone pressed to his ear, calm in the storm of their voices. He had survived far worse than this. He had survived nights when hope seemed impossible. Tonight, hope was already on the way, the form of a man who had once saved his life and now carried 4 stars on his shoulder. The officers leaned back, clearly amused. One said, "Fine, we'll wait. Let's see this mystery hero of yours. Bet he's just some washed-up vet like you." Marcus tucked the phone back into his pocket and finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting through the noise. "You'll see soon enough. And when you do, you'll wish you'd treated me with the respect I deserved from the start." The crowd buzzed with excitement. Some people whispered guesses, maybe it was a lawyer, maybe a politician. But a few sharp-eyed veterans in the crowd muttered quietly to each other. They had recognized the name James Carter. Their faces grew serious. They knew that name wasn't a bluff. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The officers laughed and made small talk, pretending not to care, but their eyes kept flicking toward the street. The crowd grew larger, pressing closer, phones ready to capture whatever came next, and Marcus sat back on the bench, his backpack by his side, his posture straight now. He no longer looked like a man beaten down by life. He looked like a soldier waiting for his commander, because Marcus knew something the officers didn't. His old war buddy wasn't just anyone. He was General James Carter, one of the highest-ranking men in the country. A man whose word carried power that could shake entire rooms of leaders, and soon, that same power was about to walk straight into this city street. The minutes dragged on like hours. The officers leaned lazily against the lamppost, pretending not to care, though their smirks showed they still thought this was all a joke. The crowd had swelled larger, a circle of strangers buzzing with curiosity. Phones pointed in every direction, capturing every second. Marcus sat silently on the bench, his old phone resting in his lap. He didn't fidget, didn't argue, didn't plead. His calmness unsettled some of the onlookers. It was the calm of a man who knew something others didn't. Then, a sound cut through the hum of the streeted deep growl of an engine. Heads turned as a sleek black car, escorted by 2 military vehicles, rolled down the street. The cars pulled up beside the sidewalk with precision, their engines humming low but powerful. The officers straightened instantly, their smirks faltering. The crowd gasped. Windows rolled down, and a young soldier in dress uniform stepped out first. His posture sharp, his eyes scanning the scene like a hawk. The crowd went quiet. This wasn't normal. Then the rear door opened. A tall man stepped out. Dressed in full military uniform, his chest adorned with medals that glinted under the streetlights. On his shoulders gleamed for shining stars. His presence alone carried weight, authority that filled the entire street. He was older now, hair streaked with gray, but his stance was straight, unshakable, every step deliberate. General James Carter. The silence broke into whispers. A general. 4 stars. Oh my God, who's he here for? The officers froze, their confidence draining from their faces. They looked at Marcus, then back at the general. Struggling to connect the two, Carter's eyes swept the crowd once, then locked onto Marcus. And in that moment, his stern expression melted into something warmer: recognition, brotherhood, and loyalty that had never faded. He walked forward, his steps echoing, and when he reached Marcus, he didn't hesitate. He bent slightly and pulled the homeless man into a firm embrace. "Marcus," Carter said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "Brother, I've missed you." Marcus's eyes glistened. He returned the embrace, his voice breaking softly. "I knew you'd come." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Phones shook in hands as people realized what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a homeless man. This was a veteran, someone who had fought beside one of the most powerful men in the nation. General Carter turned sharply to the officers. His expression hardened, his voice booming with authority. "What happened here?" The officers stammered, their earlier bravado gone. We were just questioning him." He looked suspicious. Suspicious? Carter barked, his voice like thunder. "This man is Sergeant Marcus Reed. He served his country with honor. He bled beside me in battle. He carried soldiers to safety under fire. And you dared to harass him like a criminal?" The officers shrank back, their faces pale. The crowd cheered softly, voices rising in support of Marcus. Carter's voice grew sharper. "You see a man on the street and assume he is nothing. But this man is my brother. My family. Without him, I wouldn't be standing here today." He placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You owe him respect. You owe him thanks." The silence that followed was heavy. The officers lowered their heads, ashamed. The crowd erupted again, louder this time, clapping and shouting words of encouragement toward Marcus. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel like a shadow in the city. He felt seen, respected, whole. General Carter turned back to Marcus, his voice soft again. "You're coming with me. No more benches. No more cold nights. You've done enough for this country. It's time someone looked after you." Marcus swallowed hard, overwhelmed. He nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, James." But Carter shook his head. "No, thank you." And with that, the general guided Marcus toward the waiting car. The crowd parted in silence, some people with tears in their eyes. They had witnessed more than a reunion. They had witnessed the truth behind every face, no matter how weathered. Lies a story the world may have forgotten, but one that still carries power. The officers stood frozen, left to face the weight of their mistake. The lesson was carved into the moment. Never judge a man by what you see on the surface. And as the car door closed behind Marcus, the city streets seemed different. Not just for him, but for everyone who had seen the ripple of one phone call, one friendship, and one unbreakable bond of brotherhood forged in war. The street seemed to hold its breath. The sight of the black car, the soldiers in uniform, and General James Carter himself had transformed the ordinary sidewalk into a stage. People pressed closer, whispering in awe. Phones were raised high, capturing every angle. The air was no longer filled with mockery or dismissal. It was heavy with respect. General Carter stood tall in front of the two officers, his presence radiating command. Even without speaking, his authority silenced the entire block. When he finally did speak, his voice rolled like thunder. "You dare to harass this man?" Carter's eyes burned into them. "Do you know who he is? Do you know what he has done for this country?" The taller officer swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance gone. We didn't know, sir." He looked suspicious and suspicious. Carter cut him off sharply. "You see a homeless man and think he is less than you. You see tattered clothes and assume guilt. Let me tell you something. Those clothes you mocked, they belong to a man who once wore the uniform of this nation. A man who carried brothers through gunfire. A man who fought for the very freedoms you take for granted." Marcus stood beside Carter, shoulders trembling. He had never wanted to be the center of attention, but now all eyes were on him. And for the first time in years, those eyes were not filled with judgment. They were filled with admiration. The second officer shifted uneasily, his voice weak. We didn't mean any harm. We were just doing our job." Carter stepped forward, his metals glinting under the streetlights. "Doing your job is protecting the people, not humiliating them, not trampling their dignity. If this is how you treat a decorated veteran, then what hope does any citizen have?" The crowd erupted in agreement. Some clapped, others shouted words of support. "That's right. Respect our veterans. Shame on you." The officers lowered their heads, their confidence crushed under the weight of the general's words. Carter turned back to Marcus, his expression softening. He placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Brother, you've been forgotten by many, but not by me. You've given enough. It's time you are taken care of." Tears stung Marcus's eyes. His lips parted, but no words came out. For years, he had lived like a ghost, unseen and unwanted. Now, standing beside his old commander, he felt alive again. Carter looked toward the soldiers who had accompanied him. "See that Sergeant Reed is given proper housing, medical care, and every resource he needs. Effective immediately." "Yes, sir," they replied in unison. The crowd gasped. Phones recorded every second, the story spreading even before it had ended. Strangers who had once looked at Marcus with pity or disdain now looked at him with pride. The general wasn't finished. He turned one last time to the officers. His voice was calm now, but it carried a weight sharper than any shout. "Remember this moment. You judged a man by his appearance and nearly forgot his worth. Never again. Every person you see has a story. Some stories are greater than you could imagine. Learn respect or leave the badge behind." The officers nodded quickly, their faces pale. They knew their careers would carry the stain of this night. Marcus felt Carter's grip tighten slightly on his shoulder. It wasn't just comfort, it was a promise. A promise that he was no longer alone. That the bond they had forged in battle still lived strong, unbroken by time, distance, or circumstance. As Carter guided him toward the waiting car, the crowd parted like a wave. People clapped, some saluted, others whispered in disbelief. Marcus walked slowly, his head no longer bowed. He wasn't just a homeless man anymore. He was Sergeant Marcus Reed, soldier, survivor, and brother-in-arms of a 4-star general. When the car door closed behind him, Marcus let out a long, shaky breath. He had come to that street corner invisible. He was leaving it as someone remembered, someone honored. The city looked different now, brighter, lighter dot, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, Marcus knew this. The days of being ignored were over. His story wasn't ending on a cold bench, it was only beginning again. Rewritten with dignity, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond of brotherhood. The city street had changed. Just minutes ago, Marcus had been invisible, another man on a bench who most people passed without a glance. Now, the same street buzzed with applause, murmurs, and flashing phone cameras. Strangers looked at him with respect, some with tears in their eyes. The world that had ignored him for so long finally saw him. Inside the sleek black car, Marcus sat beside General Carter. The warmth of the leather seats felt strange against his tired body, almost unreal. He gripped his backpack tightly, the same bag the officers had kicked only minutes earlier. To him, it wasn't just a bag, it was his last anchor. Carrying the scraps of a life that had nearly slipped away, Carter glanced at him, his voice gentle now. "You should have called me sooner, Marcus." Marcus lowered his eyes. "I didn't want to be a burden. You've got stars on your shoulder now, a whole country to look after. Why would you have time for me?" The general's reply came firm and steady. "Because you're my brother. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you. Rank, medals, power, none of that erases what we went through together. You saved me more times than I can count. I'll never forget that." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had spent years believing he was forgotten, abandoned by the very country he had served. Yet here sat one of the most powerful men in the nation, reminding him that bonds forged in war never die. The car pulled away from the curb. But the image of the crowd lingered in Marcus's mind, people clapping, saluting, whispering his name. For the first time in years, he wasn't the homeless man. He was Sergeant Reed. Again, news spread quickly. Videos of the moment flooded social media within hours. Headlines carried the story of a 4-star general rushing to defend his old war buddy, a veteran left to suffer on the streets. People across the country watched, shocked at how a hero could be treated with such disrespect. And yet, they also saw hope, the unbreakable loyalty between brothers. The reminder that honor cannot be erased by hardship. In the days that followed, Marcus's life changed in ways he'd never expected. The foundation Carter commanded made sure he had housing, medical care, and counseling. Fellow veterans reached out, some he hadn't seen in decades, offering their support. Strangers sent letters and donations, moved by his story. But for Marcus, the greatest change wasn't the roof over his head or the clothes on his back. It was the way people looked at him now. When he walked down the street, strangers didn't look away. They nodded, they smiled, some even thanked him. Respect, something he had thought lost forever, had returned. One evening, sitting in a small apartment provided through the program, Marcus stared at a framed photo on the table. It was old and worn, showing his squad during deployment, all of them smiling despite the dust and danger around them. He traced the faces with his finger, whispering the names of brothers who hadn't made it home. Then he looked at the newest photo beside it, him and Carter standing together once again. Side by side, the two pictures told his story better than words ever could. The soldier he once was, the man he had become, and the brother who had never forgotten him. Marcus knew his struggles weren't over. Life would never be simple. But he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. The bond of brotherhood had lifted him from invisibility and reminded him of who he truly was. And whenever he passed a man on the street, homeless, forgotten, ignored, Marcus slowed down, offered a smile, and sometimes a helping hand. Because he knew better than anyone that behind every weary face was a story worth respecting. That night, as the city lights flickered outside his window, Marcus closed his eyes with a peace he hadn't felt in years. Respect had been restored, not just from others, but from within himself. And it all began with one phone call to an old war buddy who carried not just stars on his shoulders, but loyalty in his heart.